Hello, everyone. Hi, welcome to another session of Newton School Launchpad program. This is the program by Newton School in which it encourages people who have little or no experience with technology or any programming languages in general. So we start from the scratch, bottoms up, and then we build various concepts so that we are able to solve much bigger problems going ahead in the future. This is the fifth session of this particular program. Let me share my screen and I'll tell you that if you are interested or you're coming for the first time, what you can do is that you can just go through the previous videos in which we have covered various basic concepts like what is JavaScript, how is it different from other programming languages, and uh, we talked about functions, why is it called a functional programming language, and we talked about functions, variables, objects, arrays. In the last session, we talked about string, we talked about loops, if conditionals. So we have covered a lot of basics. Today, we are going to dive into a few more concepts which are little advanced, and probably going forward, like a few sessions that we have left, we will be focusing on some of the advanced concepts. And using all of the previous concepts that we have already covered in the previous session. So I would really recommend you, if you're coming for the first time and you have no experience, we have tried to cover everything, and it would be very beneficial for you if you go ahead and see the previous videos so that we were able to connect much better. So let me just share my screen. Okay. So basically, this is your Newton School website, and in this you can easily log in. You can it's totally, there's no credit card, nothing is required. It's completely, everything is free of cost. And in that you'll see this Launchpad as a program. It will appear, and there are a lot of courses already, like Java, JavaScript, Python, and all of that. The one that we are covering today is Introduction to JavaScript by Anirudh Agarwal. In this, you can see that there are 4 lectures which are already available. This is the fifth one that we are currently taking up right now. And today, and so the thing is that, and to just play around with what we have taught in the class, there's something called as playground. People who have previously attended my sessions would already know. So this is an ID which is already available, which is given to you to for you to start practicing. If you are stuck, you can also share this particular link, and you can raise your own doubts basically. So there's a doubts forum. You can add a doubt. In the doubts forum, it will see, and people are always looking to solving the doubts here, right? So we'll just quickly go to what we covered last time, and then we will so basically, we talked about strings, right? That what are strings? How? So basically, we talked about how string is just basically an array implementation underneath, which will hold some characters into each of its indexes, uh, and uh, and you can refer to any of the characters by using just the index of that particular by index of that particular character, whichever you want, right? So if you're looking for Anirudh, and if you want to get the character for like n, which lies at position 2, what you will do is you will do s of and square brackets of 1. So since the indexes always start from the 0th index and not from the 1 index, right? So that is what we are going to do. And just to recap on what we have been doing, and since there was a weekend, we might have lost touch. So what we'll do is that we'll just try to recollect all the concepts that we have covered in the previous thing, so that, and what we'll do is we'll try to solve for a very simple program. This is a program which is asked in like multiple interviews, and this is a very simple basic programming question that we are going to solve today. So the question is that you have to check whether a string is a palindrome or not, right? So what is a palindrome? A palindrome is something which is a palindrome. You can consider a string as a palindrome when spelt backwards. It's exactly the same way. It's screen is Nitin, right? So Nitin. When you reverse this guy, so in the forward direction, it's also Nitin. When you reverse this guy, it's also this is the same thing, right? So it's Nitin. One other example could be Malayalam, right? It's also a palindrome. So there are so many, right? So basically, what we are going to do is that we are going to check this particular thing, whether whether the string is a palindrome or not. So what we'll do is that we'll quickly jump into our ID, and here we'll open up the playground. I already have created one. If you haven't, you can just create. It's a simple process. And what we'll do is we'll remove everything. And what we'll do is we'll define a function, right? So function, and we'll name the function as check palindrome, right? And just a quick reminder of what is this. So basically, function is basically a keyword, reserved keyword by JavaScript. Then we gave it a function name. Sorry, my bad, I messed up the spelling. Then we have parentheses, which will take in some argument. So what we'll do is we'll take it an argument and we'll name it string, right? So it will take a string, and then we have curly braces, and anything written inside this curly braces is basically uh, uh, is called a function body. And then we can have a return value, which is like return, and we'll return it true or false depending on whether whatever we'll do some processing over here. So what we'll do is that we'll put some processing, and on basis of that we'll either return true or false. So uh, let's take it one step at a time. So basically, what is the expectation, right? So we expect that there should be a string, and what should it return? So basically, it should return a true or false. So what we'll do is that we'll keep a variable and we'll name it result, right? And then we'll give it a value of, we'll have to give it a value, we'll give it a value of false, right? Initial starting value, and then we'll do some processing over it, and then what we'll do is that we'll return this particular that, right? And we'll do this return of result, right? And whatever processing it will do, we'll set this either as true or false. Very simple, right? So then we'll since this is the function, this won't get in this basically, since we've already talked about it, just reviewing that this body would not get called till the time this function is called, right? So that is called function invocation, right? So we'll invocate the function, and we'll do check palindrome, and we'll pass it a value of, let's say, NITIN, right? That is what our example was, right? So now when I try to and then what we'll do is we'll print this particular result. So we'll do console.log of, and let me just capture it in a variable. String is string palindrome, and we'll take it in a variable, and then we'll log this particular variable, basically print it, and we'll say is string palindrome, right? So for now, the expectation is that it will always return a value of false, since we haven't done any processing over it, right? So we'll just try to run it and see, and we'll this basically, this is a very good practice in which you will always confirm that your skeleton of your code is good, right? It's good enough. Now what you have to do is that now you can run your brain in one particular direction, wherein you just have to do the processing over it, right? So now just think about it. So basically, we talked about a lot of functions that are there in strings, and as a homework, we had talked about that on Friday over the weekend. We'll go through some of the basic functions that are provided by the string in JavaScript. So one very easy example of doing this would be I'll just create another variable. I'll name it reverse, and what I can do is that I can do str.reverse, right? So it's a function which is inbuilt, given by JavaScript it's given by JavaScript, and that's why we can easily use it, right? So we'll also come to the implementation of what in JavaScript would be doing, right? What is it that when we call this function? It's a function, right? So what is happening when we call this particular function, right? So what we'll do is that we'll do, and now we can also do a console.log of, we'll see reverse value, right? So let me, since this would be the same, we'll give it some other name. I'll give it Anirudh, let's say, for my name, or let's say we'll give it Newton, right? And uh, and we'll try to run. So we should see NOTWEN. That is what we should be seeing. I am not sure what went wrong. Something went wrong, and str.reverse is not a function. Okay, okay. So basically, there is no function value. And let me just check. Okay. Uh, we'll do a quick Google search of string reverse in JavaScript, and 3 ways to reverse a string. We'll simply do a Google search, and it says reverse string, reverse string. passing to the built-in functions. Okay, it says that there is something split and there is a reverse function. It says that, okay, fine, let us leave that and we'll jump to the implementation itself. So basically what we want to do is that we want to we want to create a reverse string, right? So let's define that. We'll create a var reversed string, and we'll give it a value. We'll leave it as is, right? And then what we'll do is that we will create a for loop, because we want to iterate through our given string, which is str, and we want to iterate it, and we want to pick up from the last. And then so basically when we are reading the string, we had done the exercise on Friday, wherein we had uh, printed all the characters of the string in one in from the starting. What we have to do is we just have to do the exact opposite, right? So what we'll do is we'll create a for loop, and we'll say var of I equal to, and this time the starting value would be string dot length, right? uh, and it will be -1. We'll start it from there, and then yeah, and then we'll say till I is greater than or equal to 0, and we'll do I minus minus, right? So, and just we'll log it once just to see if we are right, and we'll do this. Let me just remove this guy, and we'll try to run this. Yep. Okay, so that is our expectation, right? That is what we wanted. NOTWEN, right? And so that's exactly what we wanted. So what we can do is that we'll do reverse string equal to reverse string plus the value str at index, and this will just construct our string. And what we'll do is after this is run, we'll do log of the string, right? Okay, what does it say? And there is, okay, we did not name the variable correctly, so we'll copy this and we'll paste it over here, and then we'll see. So basically what it's a very good exercise, right? So it's okay, cool. So basically it's a very good exercise. So let me just repeat that, what the mistake that I just did. And we'd actually tried to run this, right? And we got an error, and the error says that, okay, a reverse is not defined. So basically the JavaScript compiler is trying to tell us that reverse is something which you're trying to log, but it's never defined, right? So and then I came to this, okay, reverse is actually not defined if the variable that we're looking for is reverse string, right? So what we'll do is we'll put it reverse string here, and then we'll try to run and we'll see what happens, right? So now we'll see it says that undefined not WEN, right? So this is what we wanted. This is the exact value that we wanted, and undefined was actually the previous held value. So that is because it was actually undefined, right? So what we'll do is that we'll initialize it with an empty string, and then we'll see what happens, right? So so that we do not see undefined. So its initial value would be empty, and then all of these would get added one by one, right? That is what we'll do, and it should give us the correct value. So now we have this particular reverse string, which is working perfectly fine. And just to, I am not sure why the reverse function did not work. Probably basically the thing is that this is exactly what the reverse function of JavaScript is doing internally. I'll get back on why it did not work last time. We'll take it up in the next session, right? So for now, what is it now? The expectation is that if we want to say that if reversed string is equal to your result, or your string, then we'll say that result is true. Otherwise, we'll say result is false, right? So let me just identify. And this should work the way we expect it to, right? So we'll try to run it, and it prints the value of false. And then if I try to print Nitin, and should ideally print true. Yes, that is exactly it, printed true, right? So once this is a very simple program. One thing that I would want everybody who's watching to try out right now is that right now if I make any of these as capital, right? If I make n as capital and this n as small, so basically it will give me a value of false, right? So what I would like to see is that if you were able to actually solve it for basically to ignore the case of the characters. So it should be simple enough. We had a few, please refer to the previous in which we had talked about lowercase. There's something known as two lowercase, which we had talked about. And if you are able to do that, it's a very good thing that we would be able to accomplish, right? So just that will stitch a few things together, right? So basically, this is our implementation in which we used for loop, we used conditionals, we used functions, we used function variables, we use log. So basically, this is basically the all the things that we have learned till now, and this basically revises all of that for us, right? Now what we'll do is we'll move to a new concept, which is the more advanced version of the concept, which is basically what are classes. So if you remember, we had talked uh, about objects, right? Objects in JavaScript, wherein I had told you. So let me just quickly define an object just for everybody's reference. So this is basically what an object would look like in JavaScript, right? That this is exactly, and then you can put in different values inside it, where an a can be assigned a value, or so on and so forth, right? You can give it any values, and also one more way of defining an object, a value, an entry in this thing would be, we'll name it C and we can name it 3, right? And what we can do is that we can simply console.log of obj, and then we'll see that all three values have been inserted into the object, right? So that, and that is exactly what it did for us, right? It helped us in all of this, right? So now so basically this is exactly what an object is, and we had taken an example of library management system, and we had talked about, well, what is the importance of objects, what's the importance of arrays, and all of that. So if just going back to that example, right, in which we had talked about a book, right, an object of a book, right? So if we had talked about that the object of a book would look like something like this, like book one would look like, let's say the name would be intro to algorithms and something, and then number of copies. So copies, we can name it anything, right? So we can do it copies as pen, and then so on and so forth, right? There could be a lot of things, right? So which could we can put in, right? Now basically the thing is that what the expectation would be that, and the reason why we had created the object would be that we wanted to put all the data together that was there for a particular book, right? Now how do you create this object? What we want to understand is that how would I go about creating this object? And that is wherein classes come in. Now before we jump into classes, there's one concept that is there, is that JavaScript is basically a functional programming language, as well as it is an object-oriented programming language. So you can use JavaScript if you want to structure your code in a functional way, whereas you can use same language for actually running your code in an object-oriented way, right? And this was introduced lately. So basically, JavaScript was initially introduced as a functional programming language, but with the ES6, ES6 is basically a standard for a language. When it came in, since then classes have been introduced into JavaScript, right? So now just going back to the example of the books, what is it? So basically this is an object, right? And this object would can contain n number of things, right? And so we'll put in some values, some dummy variables, and we'll call it a and one, and just for the sake of argument we'll put, right? So now what would happen is that in this case, who would be responsible for creating this object, right? Since we had already talked about that the book library in the library management system, right? So who is the person? So if I am the developer and I've given it to somebody to just run the code, it would be responsibility for me, right? So every time a new book is added, what I would have to do is that I would have to create a new object, which I would say that book. Let's say there were 100 books, so this is 101 book. So what I'll do is I'll have to write book 101, and I'll do this, right? And I'll have to name it something, and all it might contain some properties, it might not. So let's say introduction to data structures, right? So we'll say introduction to data structures, right? So this is so, and there would be so many other books, right? And every time book has to be added, then what is the librarian has to do? He has to just run back to me and say that, okay, you've added another book. Now what we want to do is that you want you to create another book for us. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll write this, right? But this is not a scalable solution, right? This is we have to talk, we have to, once we give a product, and they should be able to add new books, delete new books, and all of that should be something which should be available in the system itself, in the software that we are trying to build, that should be there, right? So that is where classes come in, right? So basically a class is nothing but an encapsulation of some of the data members. So basically the data members, which would be your member variables or member functions. That's it, right? So it might not sound very it might not sound very simple, but think about it, right? So we always need to focus on the why was a thing introduced into a language, right? If it hadn't been necessary, JavaScript is not against us, right? The developers of JavaScript are not against us. They are trying to help us out, right? So why, what is the need of a class, right? So now think about that there's a class, and all of these variables, right? Now, and we had also talked about that, particularly if I want to say that if a person is if a person is issuing a book, so this particular value of copies would have to get decremented to 9, or let's say somebody returns it, then we'll have to put it to 11, right? So now we'll have to write a function, right? So which would be that increment copy in book, right? And which will take in an argument. So this is the function that I can easily write, and I can say increment copy in a book, and it will take an object, and what it will do is that what this guy will do is that object dot copies, it will assign it to object dot copies as -1, right? So that is exactly what it will do. And every time we want to decrement, if somebody is returning a book, we'll increment this count in our system. A copy would increase, and similarly, when somebody is issuing a book, we'll have to call this function and saying that this particular value has to be decremented. Now think about a scenario, right? This might become very complex to handle at some point of time, right? That there are books lying around, and there are book variable lying around, and there are functions lying around, right? So one better approach to handle is this, that we should, and since this function, right, it is working only on this particular object, it would not. So let's say if I have some other object, let's say a dummy object, and I'll give it some object, right? Now what would happen in this case is that if I pass this, so if I try to increment, if I call this function with dummy variable, right, it will give me an error. It will result into an error because it will say that object.copies does not exist, right? Because the object does not have that particular variable, the same thing that we saw here, right? The reverse string and the reverse, right? Exactly the same way. So since this function is very tightly coupled to this particular object, what would it not make sense to put it in one place, right? So that is exactly what we will try to do, and that is where classes help us, right? So we'll just remove all of this, and what we'll do is we'll create a class. And creating class is nothing. We just have to name it a class, and give it a name, right? Like you do, and then you just use curly braces. And the difference between a function and a class would be that you do not have to put these parentheses around, right? And then what you can do is that you can do book, and then you can give it a variable of, let's say any name, and then you can give it a variable of okay, we'll give it let us not give any name for now, and then we'll say let's say copies, right? And then what you can do is that here we can define a function saying that increment copies, right? So this is exactly, and what is it that this guy is nothing. This guy is basically when these are your variables. So these are known as your member variables, and any function inside your class is called a member function, right? That's it. These are the data members because these carry your data, and these are the function member functions. That's it. That is it, right? So just we'll come back to this example. This was just to explain what is the need of a class, right? Even if you haven't understood, we'll go through each of these concepts very slowly, And just to make it easier, let's for now we'll just create a class and we'll name it hello, right? And we'll name it hello and we'll give it and we'll say that greetings, right? We'll create a function called greeting, and in that we'll do console.log and we'll say good afternoon. And that is exactly how it will be done, right? So basically what has happened is that we've created a class and we've created a member function inside it. We do not have any data members inside it. For now, let's, for the sake of simplicity, we'll add some variables to it, right? Now what we'll do is that now this particular class is, now what happens? It's when we create a class, right? So this class is exactly like a function. This value, all of this function would not get invoked till the time we actually call this particular function, right? Exactly similarly how functions work. Now what we'll do is that when we try to do hello dot greetings, right? And we'll see this should not work ideally, and we'll see why it would not work. I just want to see the error that this guy prints, right? So what does it say? Hello greetings is not a function. Why is it saying that? Why should it say that? It's a function, right? We've defined it as a function. So now classes actually do not work the same way as you would do in a functional programming language, right? As in a functional way. So basically, if you want to invocate a function, right? So now what has happened is that whatever you are defining inside this particular class, any data member or any member function that has to be defined in a class is actually tied to that particular class. Now the class in itself is not complete. A class needs to create its own instance before it can be invoked. So just this might sound too much over the head, but just try to understand, and will and just try to keep going, and will by the end of the session you will be able to understand what are classes, right? So and why are they so important, right? So basically, if you want to, and there's a class, right? And if you want to, so basically you can consider a class as a skeleton for your object. So so let's say we had created an object called obj, uh, and we had created we had put a variable obj, and we had defined it some value, and which we had given a name, right? And we had given some name and we had given some copies. Just keep it as is so that we are able to see what is happening. Now this particular object that we see currently, right? This, consider this class as your skeleton of this particular object. So basically, what you need to do is that you need to create a class. Is there a class? Has to be a class for its objects to get invoked. It has to be tied to a particular object. You need to create an instance of it, and creating an instance is exactly similar to creating an object. So now if you want to create an instance of a class, what would happen is that what do you have to do is, just to create an instance, what you will do is var hello. You can give it any name, and we'll use a keyword which is a reserved keyword by JavaScript called new, and we'll call it hello, and that's it, right? So basically what it did is that let's just try to log this and we'll see what happens. So basically, it did not do anything, because basically it just shows me that's an object and the name of the class is hello. That's it. So if I name this class to hello world, I'll have to also change it here, and it will change this guy's value will change to hello world. That's it, right? So basically, what it is doing is, class is nothing but it's an object skeleton for an object, particularly object, right? And now what you can do is that with this particular instance, we can call this particular function and we'll say hello dot greetings. Now this should work, and that is exactly what it did. It actually, so basically we created an object, and we'll see hello dot greetings. When we did hello dot greetings, it actually printed whatever was, it actually invocated this function, and we are in this function we have written console.log. So we are able to write good afternoon, right? So now you get, so now we'll see the advantage. Now we know what's an object, what is the advantage, and now we will see the advantages of how a class would help us, right? So let's consider a class called book, right? And what we want to do is we'll remove all of this, and what we wanted to do is we wanted to define it a name, and we'll give it some name. We'll just define it copies, and that's it. And just try, and we'll see what happens, right? So we'll do console.log of, so console, we'll take a variable and we'll give it book1 and give it new book. So basically, just to create a variable, we use new keyword and followed by the name of the class, followed by parentheses. So basically, this will create an instance of your class. That's exactly what it does, right? We will talk about what is happening and how it works internally and all of that. Just for the sake of simplicity, let's just think about it, right? And just we'll do console.log of book1, right? And we'll see what happens. Okay. Now, interestingly, what you see is that since we did not have any data members in our previous example of hello, it did not show me anything. But now, since I have created two values, right, name and copy, so it created an object with all the data members inside your class, and that is exactly what it will do. It is, so that's why, that is what I meant, that your class is basically a skeleton of your object. Whatever you want to do, now it is very easy for us to do this, right? So now what we can do is that in this, what we can do is that increment book count. Here is something which we can, now we can put this variable in, and we can say easily, right, that and my bad, it says that, okay, I create a function, and what I can do is that copies equal to copies plus 1, right? Now, and first we'll do a setup. We'll call a function. We'll create a function called setup, right? In this, what we'll do is that it will take in two arguments, name and copies, right? So this is basically whenever I have to add a new book, what I'll do is that I'll create a new book. This is what exactly I wanted. I'll create a new book, and I'll call a setup function, and I'll give it a name, and we'll say this dot. Let's say, and just for the sake of, we'll come to why I'm renaming it, but I'll just rename it to give it some different names. You can also, and we'll call it name equal to book name, and we'll see. I think it should work, or it won't, right? And we'll do book1 dot setup, and we'll give it some name, algos. That's exactly what it will do. And it printed an error. Okay. Now we wanted to see name is not defined. Okay. Now we have this name, but it says name is not defined. Why is that? So basically, name is a data member of your class, right? So now this function to refer to its data members, right? To data members of your class. No, not the ones that are there in your function, or the ones that are there in the class. These are also known as your class level variables. So because they are defined at the class level, right? They're not inside any functions. So now what happens is that the ones that are there, that are passed inside it, or what I can do is I can create a variable and I name it temp. So these guys, so this temp, right? This particular temp is considered to be a local variable because it's local to that particular function. But these values are actually your class level variables. And to refer to your class level variable, what I want to do is that I want to set the property of name to whatever I am passing it here in this function, right? So what I have to refer, and I want to set this name to here, so that when I do a print of this guy, it creates an object like this. We want to create an object like this, right? So to refer here, what you have to do to refer to class variables, there's something known as this keyword, right? So to refer, what you have to do is you have to call this dot. That's it, to refer to class level variable and dot name, and and we also want to set up this dot copies equal to this dot, my bad, this dot copy is equal to book copies. That's it. And now and I'll pass in 10, and then we'll see what happens, right? Now basically what I have done is that it created a variable, it created an instance, it did book1 dot setup, and it called this, and now when we printed, it basically created an object out of this, right? Now what you can do is that you can create n number of copies. So I do not have to go ahead and I do not have to go ahead and write this object implementation every time. Every time I want to create an object in my memory, what I do what I can do is that I can do variable of book2, and you can simply do book, new book, and this creates another object inside my memory, right? It will create another object, and these will be given new basically it will be undefined again. So if I do console.log, and if I do console.log of book2, what we would be seeing is that we would be seeing as undefined. Why? Because these values, because we haven't called the setup function in this particular instance. So this so basically, if you think about it, right now, if you think about it, what is happening? So a class is a skeleton, and when you invocate a particular class, so it's just a skeleton. It will not do anything till the time it is not invoked. It's particularly its constructor or its new is not called. We'll talk about what constructor is, but till the time it's a new instance of that class is not created, it is nothing. It is not doing anything. As soon as you create a class, as soon as you call it with new, and so what it will do is that this will create an object in your memory, this kind of an object in your memory, and this object is then, so now this was obj, right? This is actually now book1. So this book1 has that value. Now if you do, you can easily do book1 dot copies. So it will this will give you the value of your copies, and you can do book1 dot name, and it will give you the name of the book. That's exactly, and that is why we are coming to classes, and that is why we said that it's a skeleton of a class, right? So basically it is creating, the responsibility of classes to create an object, and that object is particularly created, and we can assign it any number of values, right? So, and when we try to run it, this would be this so in book1 algos and 10 was set, but in book2, since it was a new instance, nothing was set, right? So it should, these values are actually undefined, and this is exactly how it should print, right? So that is exactly what it did. It did that, okay, name is algos, copies is 10, and the name is undefined for second book, and the copies are also undefined because we haven't called the setup function, right? And so on and so forth. So now what we can do is that we anytime what we can do is that whenever you see, let's say whenever you go to Facebook, right, when you click on a post button, the plus button, what it will do is that basically it will create an object of whatever type of media that you are trying to say. If you're trying to say that it's a text type, that it will have some class of text type post, or image type post, or video type post, and what it will do is that basically whenever you click on that image button, it will create an object of that particular class, and whatever image that you put in, it will set that value like this. It will set it to a particular variable, and then next time when you want to see that image or your text or anything, right, what they will do is that they have that instance. Now from that instance, what they'll do is that they'll just pick up that particular text or image, and they will show it to you, right? So that is exactly how things are done, right? It's nothing rocket science. This is exactly how we will also do things, right? Now one thing that comes in is that okay, let's just now, since we have understood this, we'll remove this, and we'll try to see what is the advantage of this, right? So now what we can do is that book1 dot increment block count, and that's it. What we'll call this function, and we do not need to know the current value or all of that, right? All of that is my class knows, right? My class knows that what were the current copies, I have to increment it by 1. All of that my class already knows. So I do not need to first access that book1 dot copies +1. I do not have to do all of that. So that what is it that we are doing here? We are trying to put in some abstraction, right? So we what I mean by abstraction is that I am not, so a person who is basically this particular logic, right, of writing this book class is actually implemented by somebody else. I might not be even implementing it by myself. It is totally fine, and it's totally okay that if somebody else has written it, I just need to know that what are the functions that it exposes, how do I set it, how do I increment it, how do I decrement it, right? So that is exactly what happens when we are developing software, right? So since when you see a lot of when you see let's just consider an example of string, right? String that we had considered, right? Variable str, and we wrote something, right? And then when we talked about that str dot to lowercase, right? To lowercase is a function which is provided. So basically when we are doing this, right, so what is happening is that when we do var str equal to, so basically it is creating an object of a string class, And in that string class, there is a function called to lowercase, and that is exactly what we are just invocating that. That's it. That is exactly what this function is doing. We talked about we talked about split. We talked about substring. There are so many that are there. So all of these are basically functions that are already implemented by JavaScript for us to use as is, right? So, and that is the beauty of it. Otherwise, what I would have, what I could also have easily written, right? I already know that basically string is nothing but a character implementation, right? A character array implementation, and I could have done exactly the same thing. But why I choose to not write it myself and use it, because these are the functions which are already exposed by JavaScript for me, right? I do not have to go through the hassle of doing it all over and over again. So this particularly class is getting used, and what I know, I have read through documentation of string, and I know that there are a lot of functions called substring. There's a function called to lowercase. There's a function called to uppercase. And I can just use those functions. And exactly that's the point I was trying to make. That when we have a class called book, and now since I've created this object, when I've created this object, now I do not need to understand that what is happening when I say increment book count or decrement book count. We have abstracted that logic to that class. Now I am just a consumer of it. I just need to know what functions are exposed, and my work is done, right? So let's say now when I try to print this, right, and we'll see how this works. We'll do console.log of book one, right? Oops, my bad. And right, so basically right now when we had set up, the value was 10, so this guy would be holding 10, and then we try to log it, and then we say that we want to increment the counter, and then we'll try to see the new value of the object, right? The instance of the particular book class. Okay, we did not print. Something is wrong. Yes. Now, if somebody's paying attention, this is something which I should have seen. It's like you have to do, since we are actually trying to refer, and it says the exactly same, copy is not defined, right? So as I told that to actually, and this we are trying to actually basically refer to the class level variable. So we have to do this dot, right? And we'll do similarly this dot copies plus one. Now it should work. And that is exactly how it works, right? So book one was, now it was 10, and then we incremented, and it got the value got changed to 11. Now we can also define decrement, and similarly, right? So on and so forth. We can do this, and there should be some implementation, right? So that's exactly my point of trying to explain that why is a class so necessary for us. Now every time we want to do this, we can do this. Now since we already talked about, one second. Yeah, since we already talked about what are basically class level variables and local variables. So what we can do is that if you want to give a same name, right? If you want to give the same name as a class level variable, it is easier. We can do that, right? So I had edited it to explain this concept. So whenever you're doing copies, whenever when you write copies here, it's actually referring to your local variable. But if you do this dot copies, it will refer to your class level. Even though the name of the variable is same, it's actually referring to two different things, right? So this dot copies refers to the class level variable, and copies actually refers to your local variable. So this concept I wanted to cover. This is very useful. In most of the time, it's very useful in trying to set up, right? When you're trying to set up, this will get used very concurrently. Okay, right. So now we have covered what are objects, what are data members. We have covered what are member functions. One more thing, one very important concept, and all of this, right? All of this that we have covered right now is actually something which is common across all programming languages. Any object-oriented programming language you take up, C++ or Java, the concepts remain the same. Just the implementation might, even this implementation, right? New and writing this, a lot of it is inspired by Java itself, right? Since this came out very recently in JavaScript, and Java had actually laid out basically a framework or a layout. A lot of languages and a lot of new languages coming in will actually all try to use the same syntax similar to this one, right? This is a very common syntax that you can see. uh, Cool. So now one more concept that we need to cover, that's very important when we talk about classes, is called constructor, right? So basically, constructor is nothing. It's a special kind of a function which can be associated with only a class, right? And it is not given any value. So it's basically a function without any function name, and it's called as constructor. We have to write a constructor, and it works exactly like a function, and you do a curly braces, and you can do anything inside it, right? A console.log, and we can write constructor called, right? So basically, this is exactly what a constructor looks like. Now we might think about that. What is the need of a constructor, right? So the need of a constructor is that whenever your class is getting initialized, this is the time whenever you create an object or your class is getting initialized, that is the time your constructor gets called. That's the only time a constructor will get called. It will never get called. It will never get called again. So that's the only time whenever you're creating an instance of a class, or you're creating an object of a class, or you're writing this new, right? This is basically, what you are doing is that you are actually calling the constructor of the class. And constructor is a special kind of function. What it does is that what it will do is that it will create. So there are two advantages or two functionalities that a constructor provides. One is that it will create an instance that we saw already. So when we are doing this, right, new book, what we are doing is we are actually calling this particular function. If you don't write it there, JavaScript by default provides it a default constructor that is actually called a default constructor. That's the name for it, and it provides a default constructor. If you don't want, you can also put a constructor. Now we'll come to what are the uses of it, but this is when a constructor gets called. So if I just try to sorry. So if I just try to I try to run this code, I should see that this should get called before even this guy, or when we try to log this guy, right? So let me just do this and console.log, and we'll do cons after instance created. This is, and we'll see we'll try run and we'll see what is happening. Right? So basically it says that constructor called, and it says that after constructor created. This is exactly what it is telling us. Now we also got an error, and it says that book name is not okay. So since we changed the name of the book, we also have to define it name, and then we'll do copies. That's it. Now we'll run it. There shouldn't be an error. And yes, that's exactly what. Now just to go through what we have done, when we called this new book, right, this particular constructor got called. That is exactly what I've been telling you, and it printed this constructor called, right? And then after that we do console.log, wherein after instance call gets called. So we have confirmed that this constructor gets called whenever we do a new book. Now what is the advantage of using a constructor? Why do we even need constructors? So basically, usually constructors are used whenever you want to initialize something in your class, whenever you want to initialize variables or anything. Basically, it could be anything that you want to initialize when your instance is getting created. So in our case, what we can say is that instead of doing this, and instead of every time calling a function called setup, what I can do is that I can remove this function, and while my class is actually getting called, while my class is actually instantiating, or an instance getting created, why don't I actually take these arguments in my constructor? Why don't I take these params in my constructor, and I can say name and copies, right? And it is as simple as that, right? And what we can do is that we can do we can here only, instead of this setup, right, we can do all of this functionality here itself, and that is it, right? So now what is it that what we are doing is that now we do not have to call this setup function, and while my instance getting created, I have passed these values here, and at the time of constructor, and then at the time of class instance creation, these values will get set. That's it. That is it. So that's the use of a constructor. Now tomorrow we'll be talking about inheritance, and we'll see the use of super keyword. What is the advantage of all of that? We'll see all of that. But this is what a constructor does for now. So constructor can perform some of its own functionality. Also, the main function of a constructor is that it can be called. It's created. It creates an instance for us. Another property of a constructor is it cannot be called. You cannot call a class dot constructor. It can only be called with a new keyword. Also, constructor does not have a name. It can take any number of parameters, and those are the few properties of a constructor. And we'll see. We'll try to run this, and we'll see what is it that we are doing. What is it that's happening, right? And this is exactly, again, we saw this. So we'll see, saw the same thing, right? So let me just increment this, and I'll name it. I'll give it 90, right? And we'll try to see. Like, so now what happened is that when we did a new book, we passed it the name of algos. So it set the class level variable as name, and then when I do name.copies, and I'll give it a copies here, and what it did is that it will basically, it's actually it assigned the value of 90 to this guy, and when I called and I printed this, so this is the print from line number 27, and it has 90 copies. Now we called book.increment book count, and we gave it, and then we tried to print this value, so it is 91. Now let's say I'll create another book, right? And I'll give it JavaScript, right? And let's say there were 50 copies before, and we'll remove this. Since we already understood, we'll remove this guy. We'll remove the logs, right? And we'll remove this guy also. And we'll remove this. And there were 50 copies, and let's say some we tried, and let's say a few of the students returned these books, right? So we'll do 4 times, right? And we'll try to print what happens. Cool. So basically what happened is that we created an object, algos, and let's remove this guy as well, just to make it a little clean. Yeah, cool. So now we'll talk about this, what is happening, right? So just to bring this to view, we'll remove this guy. Yes, cool. And we'll remove this function as well, so that everything comes. Yeah. Okay. So now basically we created a new book object in which we gave it a name of algos and 90. And then we called this increment function. And in this particular, so basically, if you think about it, now what happened is that when we created a new, right, there's something known as let's just for very simple purposes, let's keep it an object, and let's consider this as a container. So basically, whenever you did new book, what it did is created a new container. It put it there in this. It saw that it had 2 values. The class had two data members, so it put all those 2 data members inside that particular container, right? And also it attaches a few objects, a few of the member functions that are there, right? So it also attaches these 2 functions to that particular. Now when we did a new book, right, book 2. Now when we did, okay, my bad. We should name it book 2. Cool, right? So when we do a book 2, right? So it created another container, and it gave it and it assigned its values to, and it also had new name and copies inside it, and it had also two member functions, increment and decrement book count. Now these all of these, right, will actually work together in a container. So when you call increment, right, for book 1, when you call increment for book 1, it actually is working inside its own container. It is not going, it has nothing to do with what is happening in the other container. Now book 2 is not concerned about what book 1 is happening, and book 1 is not concerned about what book 2 is happening, right? So when we called 4 times increment book count to my book 2, it incremented the copies value in this container, and it left it here itself, right? So this is actually a very, very important concept of object oriented programming, right? So this is how we create an object from a class, right? We created an object from a class. That's what object oriented programming is about. This is a concept. This is a universal concept which applies to all the object oriented programming languages across the world, right? So this is one concept that we wanted to cover, and so it's a very important one, right? And I would have liked to cover a few of static and non-static. I'll just give you a brief introduction what static variables and what static member functions are, and then probably we'll try to cover them in detail tomorrow, right? So let's just consider. So basically, all of these, right? So I told you that there's a container that gets created for all of these classes, right? Or when a class, an object of a class is created, a container is created, and these values, right, name and copies, right, name and copies is held individually by one of the containers. Now there is something known as static variables, right? So let's say what you can do is that you can give it, what you have to do is that you have to give it a there's a reserved keyword called static, and you can name it static name, right? That's it. And what this guy does is that this is attached to not an instance but a class. So what would happen is that when we define static name, right, we can give it any name, right? So let's say I give it college or school name. Now, since the school, usually a library, there's only one library in one school, right? So all the books would have only one school, right? Just for sake of example, let's consider this, right? Or you can also consider the example of an employee, right? In which an employee will always be a part of one organization. He will always be a part of your one particular organization, and that's why it is always. So why should I always and the school name or the company name or whatever, right? Why should I always keep these values in different containers, since they are always going to have one particular value, right? So what I can do is that static gives me the ability of attaching something to a class. So everything, right? So all the instances of a book or in this case book, or all the instances of a class can hold a common property with something known as static. So what you can do is that this particular static school name, right? So let's say and this particular static school name will hold a common property across all instances. So just for the sake of explanation of it, what we'll do is that today I'll just give you an example, and then we'll go deep down into it tomorrow, and we'll see how static helps us and why it's need, and what are static functions and all of that, right? So let's just, for the sake of simplicity, what I can do is that now we'll try to print what is it that our object actually prints, right? So now that you see that even though we have added this static particular member data member, right, it did not reflect in our object, because this object that it creates, its object that it prints, right, it's actually at runtime. So it is not attached to that particular container. This is my state of the container at any point of time. When I printed it, it printed the state of the container. But since the static variable is not a part of that container, it's not a part of instance, but it is attached to a class, right? It's attached to a class. Hence I should be able to hence it is not coming here. And also, since it is not a part of an instance, right, what I can do is that I can actually refer to this variable as book dot school name. And if you remember, so we'll try to do this console.log. And if you remember, when we had tried to do book.name, it gave me an error that it could not find that particular variable, right? But when we do this, it should not give me an error, because it is already attached to my class, right? It has nothing to do. It is not related to to an instance. So it should not wait for that instance to come up. We can access it at any point of time, and we'll see this in action, right? So basically it printed a value of undefined. I can also assign it any value. I can say book dot school name equal to, and we'll name it Newton School. Right, we'll name it Newton School, and we'll run it. So it will set that property. Now what one good thing about this is that since instances are also a part of your class, you can also actually refer to an instance by you can also refer to a static data member using your instance, right? So when I've created this instance book1, I can do book1 dot school name. Okay, my bad, school name. And let's remove this, and I give it a value of, let's say I give it a value of Newton, right? And now since we saw that these so the copies was, so the point I'm trying to make is that copies is something which is created for different objects. When you create an object, it will create an container, and every container will hold a separate copy, separate value for copies, right? But this is not the case for static variables since they're shared. So if I do book1 dot school name as Newton, right? And when I try to do console.log of book2 dot school name, it would give me it would give me the value that I had set, because when on one instance variable, when I was setting this value, it actually set at my class level, and in any of the instances whenever I try to fetch that particular whenever I try to fetch that particular value of a static variable, it will give me the same value, and that is exactly what we'll see, right? So let's do this. And so basically now what it did is that it actually did okay, my bad. Oh, okay. Yeah. So I think we're running out of time. Let's try continue this tomorrow. But I've tried to give you a brief idea of what static variables are, and we'll continue. We'll pick up exactly from here, and we'll see why did we see this error in action, right? So that is it for today. Please feel free to ask any questions, and it is completely understandable if you are not able to grasp all the concepts. It's absolutely fine for somebody who's trying very new, or and he's actually doing something of something or the other. It's fine, absolutely. And by after tomorrow's session, I feel that we should be a little more comfortable with the concepts of classes, objects, static variables, and we'll try to see if we can cover inheritance and all, right? So that is me signing off. Thank you.